Thank you for listening to the Southern Gospel Journal podcast. My name is Daniel Mount, and I'm joined today by Greg Bentley. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great, Daniel. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. So last time when we talked mostly about your onstage career with several different groups. And I think this conversation, I've been thinking to mostly focus it on offstage, the things you've done behind the scenes. But there were a couple of loose ends to tie up first. One of which was last time I asked a multi-part question and moved on before you had a chance to answer one of the parts. And oddly enough, it was the part about any memorable or funny or moving moments that come to mind from your time with the Hoppers.
Obviously, there was a lot of memorable times there, and a lot of moving times. Anytime you're traveling with somebody like Connie Hopper,
Yeah.
there's moments in concerts and services that are just that are great. But it always seems to be the funny ones that kind of stick out. And there's a couple that I could share with that. I remember not long after I had joined them, we were going to Greenville, South Carolina to Mark V Studios to record an album. So it was a couple hours from Madison down to Greenville, South Carolina. So we were just taking the car down. And I believe if I remember right, Dean might have been driving. Shannon was in the front passenger seat, and Connie and myself were in the back seat of the car. And of course, we had to leave early that morning, so we're all real quiet, kind of almost, not quite awake. And we're going through Charlotte, North Carolina, and just out of the blue, Connie goes, "Did you know that the Great Wall of China goes all the way around China?" It just stopped. That's all she said. Stop.
Oh, my.
And we're all going, wait, what? And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I just saw a billboard for a Chinese restaurant called the Great Wall, and it just reminded me of the Great Wall of China."
That's funny.
And I said, "I'm going back to sleep." So, but I remember that one. And then we did a live album when I was with the Hoppers, and Connie had written a song called "He's Still God."
Yeah.
Which was a great just drive and had a lot of energy and stuff in it. And so one night we were singing up in, I believe it was either West Virginia or Kentucky, and it was at a high school auditorium. It was in the middle of the summer. It was boiling hot, and there was no air conditioning, and we were singing in the gymnasium at the high school. And we got there set up, and I mean, it was just miserably humid.
Yeah.
Well, by the time for the concert to start, there might have been 50 people there. I mean, it was a really low crowd that night. But of course, our thing was, doesn't matter how many people are there, you go in and you give them everything that you got,
Yeah.
But often on those nights, we were a little bit more loose and a little bit more having fun. And of course, this wasn't too awfully long after the McCamey song was really popular, "God on the Mountain." And of course, everybody remembers from the live album of that, Peg, just in the middle, I was going, "He's still God," right in the middle of the thing. Well, we're up there singing "He's Still God," and Dean's doing his verse, and I've got my back to Connie. She's behind me, and then Claude's behind Connie, and we're just going at it. And, what crowd was there was really into it, and we appreciated that. And all of a sudden, unknown to me, because my back's to her, Connie has slipped up right next behind me, and she just yells in my ear, "He's still God!"
Oh,
It
my.
scared me, but it was just so out of character. So there's always moments
my.
like that of
Yeah.
fun times, as well as, very spiritual and very serious times that stick out in my brain with the Hoppers.
Yeah. Any similar moments jump out from your time with Down East Boys or Squire Parsons?
I think the funniest thing with the Down East Boys was we were headed to the Jubilee at Sea cruise,
Mhm.
um, in Florida, and we're on the bus going down Interstate 95 down through South Carolina, and there's a little town that really there wasn't much of anything in this little town. Well, our bus breaks down, right, on the
Mhm.
interstate there. So, needless to say, our first thought is, "Okay, we gotta try to find somebody to work on it, and we gotta try to make sure we get a way to get on to Florida for the cruise."
Yeah.
So, a couple of the guys are calling back home saying, "Okay, who can go and get us, a van or something? Come pick us up. We'll get all the stuff unloaded on." And, then Cheryl that owned the group at the time, he was the bass singer, um, he was dealing with the garage guy that showed up with the wrecker.
Mhm.
And so, he's out there and he comes around the corner and the garage maintenance guy comes around. He goes, "I've never worked on one of these buses before, but I thought, it's a Detroit diesel engine. We can figure it out." And so Cheryl's like, "Well, come back here and we'll show it." So he raises the rear engine cover on the back, and
Mhm.
that guy goes, "I've never seen one belt driven before."
Oh my.
Cheryl just reached up, pulled it back down. He said, "Yeah, we'll tow it somewhere to have somebody who knows what they're doing to work on it." It's
Mhm.
like, okay, that's not gonna work. So,
Yeah.
there's always those kind of moments on the road as well. So,
Yeah.
we've all sat beside the road at one point or the other. Um, at times with Squire, gosh, Squire was one of those. Everybody kind of looked at him as, very spiritual, very um, professional in the way that he does things, which he was very much so. Um, but Squire was a prankster. He loved to pull pranks on people. And so one weekend we were, once again, I think it was in Kentucky, if I remember right, a little church out in the middle of nowhere. And there was a well house out in the yard.
Okay.
And, so Squire's son, Sam, Squire said, "I'm gonna play a little trick on Sam, so you go ahead and work with me on this." And so, I said, "Okay, I'll follow your lead." So we're up here and, we've gotten set up and everything, and Squire looks at Sam, he goes, "Did you see that little house out there beside the church?" And Sam's like, "Yeah, what was that?" And Squire said, "That's where they keep the snakes." And Sam was like,
Oh.
"What? What?" And Squire was like, "Yeah, that's." And Sam looks at me, I said, That probably is where they keep them. These, back off in the middle of nowhere churches, sometimes they're snake handling churches. I'm sure you've heard about them." So, this was really before Sam was doing a lot of singing with us, but he was still traveling with us, so Squire told him, said, "If while I'm up singing, you see a couple guys get up and go out, that may be what they're doing is going to get the snakes."
Okay.
So Sam's at the back of the auditorium in the church, and sure enough, two guys get up and go out while Squire's singing.
Mhm.
You should have seen the look on Sam's face. They're going to get it scared him to death.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we knew what was going on. There was no snakes at that church, but
Yeah.
things like that, Squire loved to. He's a practical joker. He enjoyed doing stuff like that. You
Yeah.
know.
All right. Moving on. Now, I can't find this music anywhere online, but just going off memory,
Mhm.
I believe that around the time you and I first met, you had a trio going called Message.
Mm, yeah,
Um, so who sang with you in that group? You did at least one recording. Did you do a few recordings?
we did a couple recordings.
Yeah.
That was based out of our home church, Trinity Baptist Church here in
Okay.
Asheville. Um, and it was basically the music minister and the associate music minister, Jay Boyce and Robert Pickens,
Okay.
were the ones that we started that trio with. Well, then Jay left to take another church, and Robert took over the main part of the music ministry part, and then there was another, gentleman there at the church that I was real good friends with, and he was involved with the music stuff. His name was Trevor Gibbs, and so we formed just kind of brought Trevor in to keep Message going, and we actually did do a couple recordings. Went and did a few dates here and there, didn't do a whole lot of dates because we were obviously involved heavily at the church. But we would go sometimes with Pastor Ralph. Ralph Sexton was the lead pastor at that time, and we'd go do some of his camp meetings, do music with him, and then of course other churches around the area. So we had a lot of fun. But yeah, there was we did. I think it was 2 albums with
Cool.
Message.
And then you've done some solo dates and several solo albums too, right?
I have through the years. My very first solo album was actually while I was with the Hoppers. Um, Anthony Berger and Eldridge Fox, of course, were part of Here Here Studios, which eventually became Horizon Records. And they were going through and doing some solo albums. And so Anthony, of course, had done some instrumental solo albums. And they got Karen Peck to do a solo album and myself to do a solo album. And so that would have been 1989, I guess it was. And on my solo album, we actually did a song called From Here Through Eternity
Okay.
that was a duet with Karen. And of course Anthony played on both solo albums, and so that was my first one. And then I did another solo album just before I started traveling with Squire, which would have been 1995, I guess it was,
Okay.
94, 95, and then did another one after that as well. So I think I've got 3 or maybe 4 total solo albums.
Cool. You've also filled in with the Kingsmen, I believe.
Mhm.
And not just necessarily for like one weekend, but for like a little stretch there when they were between tenor singers. Do you have any recollections from that? And is there anybody else who else have you filled in with through the years?
Through the years, actually, I filled in with Singing Americans more
Mm-hmm.
than anybody else. I filled in with them back in the days when Danny Funderburk actually was the tenor.
Okay.
He got sick one weekend, and so I filled in with them one weekend. And then when it came to the end of their traveling, David Sutton actually took the job with the Kingdom Heirs, and so I filled the last multiple weeks with the Singing Americans while they finished out dates that they had booked. So I filled in there. My position with the Hoppers was because I was filling
Mm-hmm.
in for Connie. So that's kind of how that position actually came about. But yes, I filled in with the Kingsmen while they were in between tenor singers. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else that I filled in years and years in, like when I was just got graduated from high school with the
Mm-hmm.
Dixie Melody Boys.
Oh, cool.
Um, back in 1980, I guess it was the summer of 81, maybe, or 82 that I filled in with them for a whole tour. And so, yeah, I guess I'm a professional fill in, I guess. But it's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
I actually filled in too with the Hayes family, the
Oh, that
original Hayes family.
really? Okay.
Yes.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there was one weekend that, Sharon was sick, and that was Janet Sharon Myland and their dad, Howard, and Lucy, their mom. And Sharon was sick, and they were singing close by. We grew up together in Boone.
Mm-hmm.
And so they called me and said, "Are you singing this weekend anywhere?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Could you possibly go and sing Sharon's part? We've got I think it was just a Sunday, if I remember right." And so that was a lot of fun. I had never got to do that with them.
That's cool. There's something I was noticing as I was listening through your recordings with different groups in preparation for this two-part interview. And that is, there's like a generalization, which isn't always true, but like Southern gospel tenors often tend to like the big notes, the big moments, the spotlight, and then there's the expectation like baritones like blending in harmony and making everyone else around them better. And it almost seems to me like you have a tenor's range with a baritone's temperament. It really seems like you enjoy focusing on the blend and making everyone else better. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. I think it's partially because of when I grew up singing, my big lead into and influences into singing tenor was not necessarily, even though I loved them, uh, Kingsmen or cathedrals or
Mhm.
stuff like that. It was the mixed groups.
Yeah.
One of my big influences, of course, was the Happy Goodmans when Johnny Cook was there.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that has a little bit to do with it. I'm not necessarily the style tenor that often pops out there like the Ernie Phillips or Jay Perrick or Johnny Perrick or some of those. Um, I was more always just let's make this blend tight type thing, and
Mhm.
that's kind of what I always strived at, was to do that. More so than jump out there and do the Glory Roads, even though I've sung Glory Road. And of course the whole time I was with the Hoppers, Claude had us doing Looking for a City every night. And
Mhm.
there was that, but I have always enjoyed the blending and the group harmony part more so than the big standout moments.
Yeah, and that's cool. I mean, there's obviously a place for both types of tenors in Southern
Mhm,
gospel,
mhm.
but I kind of feel like that's one of the things that makes you unique in your years with the different groups, unique and distinctive and stand out.
Well, I appreciate that.
Sure.
It's not something that most people actually even point out. They I guess they almost say, "Well, you know, he wasn't the standout type tenor."
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't know that they necessarily mean that in a derogatory way, but it's just,
Mhm.
it wasn't that I was, like the Brian Frees or the Danny Funderburks or the ones that just really got a lot of the attention through the whole time.
Yeah. Neat. So I think this would be a good point in the conversation to move off stage with some questions. You've done so many interesting things behind the scenes. One of which was, and again, this is just going off my recollections because I don't think I can see anywhere online that talks about it right now. But didn't you actually work for Singing News for a little while?
Basically, when I was with the Hoppers,
Yeah.
of course, being from Boone and Maurice Templeton that owned Singing News for years,
Hmm.
Singing News was based in Boone. So I was very, very tied in with that part of it there. Maurice came to me one time and he said, "You're young. You're, really in with all the young people that are in the music. I want a article for Singing News called Youth and Gospel Music that focuses on the youth, and I want you to do it." Well, of course,
Yeah.
my first thing was, "Maurice, I'm not a writer."
Hmm.
I said, "I can get you stories, but it's not they're not gonna be well put together." And he goes, "Don't worry about that. We've got editors for that. You get me the stories, and we'll put that together." So yeah, I did the original youth and gospel music article for Singing News for, gosh,
A long time.
a long time. I would say 7 to 10 years. I don't know exactly how long we did it, but yeah, yeah, I was heavily involved there. And then, of course, because of that, um, myself and Dina Searles at the time, Dina Warren now,
Hmm.
um, Maurice wanted to put together the Singing News ski retreat
Hmm.
where we could all come together, not be, worrying about, concerts and all that kind of stuff. Just a time for the young people in gospel music to get together and spend some time as friends. And so we did many years of the Singing News ski retreat, and myself and Dina were in charge of that. And I still, to this day, every year at Quartet Convention, I have some people, Jeff and Sherry Easter, Jonathan Wilburn and his wife, different ones come up and say how much they miss the Singing New ski retreats because they were so much fun, and it was just so nice to get together and let your hair down, just relax. You don't have to get dressed up, all that kind of stuff, and just have fun with each other. And we even every night, basically, we had a time where every morning, one or the other, we would do a devotion time and have one of the people, do a devotion with us. And so it was just a really great retreat all the way around.
Very neat. So were those in Boone, or did you go out to like Colorado or something for that?
No, they were in Boone.
Cool.
Boone, North Carolina is kind of the southeast ski hub. You've
Hmm.
got Appalachian Ski Mountain, Sugar Mountain, and Beach Mountain, all ski resorts right there around the Boone area. And
Yeah.
Maurice and his brother owned a resort up there called Chatola Lodge. And so we would rent the whole hotel
Hmm.
uh, for that week. And so no one was in the hotel except just Singing News ski retreat people. And so that also made it a lot of fun, just to get to hang out. And but yeah, it was always there in the Boone area.
Neat. And this then doing this column for a decade or so. Yeah, I did something similar when I was blogging. I did a
Mhm,
lot of interviews with somebody when they first joined a group,
mhm,
um, which those are often, well, they've joined their first group, especially often 18, 20, 22 year olds. Not always, but
sure.
the thing of it is, there's a lot of people who come sing for a couple of years and then they go get a ministry music job or a 8 to 5 job and go home. And that was their time on the road. And that was great. And they still contributed something to our music. And then there's always some lifers, people who are in for life. So and so for instance, um, I did Pat Barker's first interview when he joined the
Mm,
Dixie Echoes, and
wow.
of course, everybody knows him now. And it
Yeah.
was fun because he and I revisited when I did an episode with him fairly recently. He was like, you were actually my first interview, so this is kind of full circle. So I imagine you had some of both kinds of moments. I imagine you interviewed plenty of people who are around for a
Mhm,
couple years, and
mhm,
then some people who are still in the industry. And do you have? I'm
mhm.
sure there are people who you first connected with through that column who you're still friends with, probably.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few people that I interviewed through there, some that are working behind the scenes now, in the industry, and some that, obviously are still, on stage because of a lot of them were, close to my same age, so
Yeah.
like, Karen Peck, Dean Hopper, there's a whole group of us that are roughly in the within 2 or 3 years of each other, that they're still, on stage every night.
Yeah. Neat. So then moving on, about when did you start working for Horizon, now Crossroads, and what were you doing in the early days with Horizon?
I started working with them in March of 1993.
Okay.
Um, I was, with the Down East Boys at the time,
Okay.
or just coming up to that point, and, just, it's time for a change. They were the I just you sometimes you can just tell,
Hmm.
that it's just time for a change, and so I had reached out to Eldridge, and he said, "Come up to the studio. I wanna run some ideas past you." And I
Okay.
said, "Okay." And so I came up and met with him and, of course, Mickey Gamble and at that time, Eddie Swan, were the owners of, Here Here and Horizon.
Yeah.
And, they offered me a position. At that time, it was a kind of a mixture of things. Did a little bit of radio promotions, but I was to be working with, um new custom artists, that were wanting to come there and record to make sure they
Okay.
had all their pieces together for their recording and stuff like that. So that's kind of what it started out as, and then I kind of morphed from there into, publishing side of it, and work the publishing companies, which I actually still do today, handle the publishing portions of it. And of course, it just continued to "Okay, let's try this. Let's do this.
Mhm.
Let's do this." And of course, now, I do, artist relations, for all of the gospel side of the company, um, which entails all kinds of pieces of it, radio promotions, um, finding new songs, lining up recordings, the whole works.
I would love to break down, in fact, a good portion of the remaining conversation, break down a couple different aspects of you just kind of gave us the big picture overview.
Mhm,
One of which is I haven't posted it as of when we speak, but I've recorded a first episode with Chris White on the history of sunlight.
oh,
Um,
cool.
and we're hoping to make that a multi-part series if his schedule allows. But
Mhm,
I don't have right now anything lined up. Because Aldrich Fox has passed away. I can't talk to him for the history of Here and
mhm,
Horizon.
mhm.
Um, maybe I'll get a chance to talk to Mickey at some point if his health and schedule lines up. But as the case may be, while I had the chance to ask you, I'd love to talk a little bit about what you know, which is what you heard from the early years before you started, and then here. I think there's some connection to Dawn,
Mhm,
Horizon, how like
mhm,
the early years came together,
mhm.
the history of what would become Crossroads.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I came in as a lot of that was happening.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of nutshell a little bit here, there was Here Studios, which was
Hmm.
Eldridge, Mickey, Anthony Berger, and then you mentioned Dawn, Studios, Dawn Records, which was Eddie Swan's company, and these were
Okay.
both record companies, that mostly dealt with, weekend groups and stuff like that. None of them really had a major full-time touring artist, on them, but they were both based within a couple miles of each other, uh, in downtown Asheville.
Okay.
And so, basically, they decided to merge, together, bring Dawn over to, the building where Here was,
Okay.
because it was a little bit larger building, and so, Dawn merged in, and that's when Horizon Music Group formed.
Okay.
Um, and it was Horizon Music Group, and, of course, they at that point, then they started bringing in that's when we, of course, did Anthony Berger, um albums, the first Karen Peck album was on there. So we had Dawn Records and we had Pinnacle Records.
Yes.
Pinnacle Records was kind of the Here side. Dawn Records, of course, was the Dawn Records side of it.
Okay.
Um, and so we had those two labels working. And then that's when they decided to launch Horizon Records, which would have been 1992, maybe somewhere right in there. It was right
Somewhere in
close
there.
to
Yeah.
when I started. And the Kingsmen were the very first label artist on Horizon Records. They left the
Hmm.
Benson Company, and came to or River Song Benson was one of those areas there, and came to Horizon Records. And of course, Eldridge wanted to really grow the label as a mainline label. And so he actually talked to Reuben Bean,
Hmm.
who they were with Morning Star Records, the
Which is Eddie
McCamey
Crook.
Eddie Crook Company.
Hmm.
And so Eldridge talked Reuben into signing with Horizon Records too. And then I think the next group, I think, was the Isaacs,
Okay.
that signed to
They were
Horizon.
also with Morningstar, I think, at the time.
They were also over there, and then that's, right around the time that Karen launched Karen Peck and New River,
Yeah.
and so Karen Peck and New River signed, with Horizon Records, as well. Singing Americans, signed there, at one point. Uh, Teddy Huffam and the Gems, I think their
Hmm.
last album was on Horizon Records before Teddy passed. Um And so that's kind of how Horizon Records, actually started. Um, and so that kind of pulls you to that part. And then, of course, after that, then the merging of Horizon Records and Sunlight Records,
Hmm.
um, happened, which
Can I
created.
pause you? Can I pause you for 1 second before we get into that part?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just curious, so when if you're there around this time that the Kingsmen are moving from Benson, which is one of the big 2, Benson and Kane Benson's labels and Canon and its labels
Mhm,
are the big names in this music,
mhm.
and, the Kingsmen are one of the biggest groups out there. You got them coming on. Does that bring for you and your coworkers, like, a sense of confidence, like, "With the Kingsmen behind us, we're gonna succeed," or is there, like, a sense of pressure of, like, "Oh boy, we better make this work,"
Yeah,
or some
both.
mixture of both? So some mixture? Yeah.
Yes, yes, it was definitely there was the confidence because not only did we have the Kingsman signed on, but of
Yeah.
course we had the owner of the Kingsman is a partial owner in the company. So
Yeah.
he's gonna make this successful.
Okay.
Um, and so, but yes, there was pressure of, especially once we brought on McCamey's as well, because
Mhm.
McCamey's were in their full stride
Yes.
at that point. And so there was that pressure of, okay, we cannot bring them in here and it flop because
Mhm.
they are really on that upward trajectory at that point.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the very first album that we put out with them had number one song on it. So we were very fortunate and very blessed that all the pieces kept going and working in the right direction.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just curious what the mood was like once you started getting these big names come on before we
Yeah.
move on to that next part of the merger. And so
Yeah.
that merger with Sunlight, didn't it happen first as like a joint distribution deal?
It
And
did.
before you become one unitary organization, like you're doing joint distribution, then you become one
Yes.
organization together.
Yes, that is correct. Chris White had Sunlight Records in Nashville, and of course, we were here in Asheville, North Carolina, but we're looking for forming a distribution company to help get all of the music into the Christian bookstores, um, and so that's when Crossroads Distribution became a company, and it
Mhm.
was to specifically distribute Horizon Records and Sunlight Records product. That was its sole goal, is to do that.
Perfect.
And so we ran that way for quite a few years before Chris actually merged the Sunlight company into what became Crossroads Entertainment and Marketing, past the Crossroads Distribution Company.
Cool. Um, okay. I think maybe we talk about a couple of your specific roles and then we can wrap up with any of the more recent history of the label. So you mentioned there's two things you mentioned. One is you did publishing, and I think, there are definitely some industry people who are listening to this who will know exactly what we're talking about. But part of the reason I'm doing these episodes is for fans who enjoy the music, but don't always understand the process that by which it comes to them.
Mhm.
And I think it would be interesting if you don't mind to just kind of explain the song publishing process of what happens from the point a writer finishes a song, your role in getting it to be recorded, and the steps in between.
Okay. Basically, the songwriters get the songs finished, demo lyric copies and stuff like that turned into us as the publisher. Now, I guess part of it would be a thing of writers looking for publishing companies. Some of them, are already signed with publishing companies. We have a roster of exclusive writers for us, but we do dabble a little bit in song by song deals, which
Okay.
is we used to do a lot more, but we just don't have the time and the manpower to deal it as much. But basically, the songs come in. I make sure that they're all set up correctly with the writer's PRO, BMI, or ASCAP, or CSAC, so that anything can follow through once somebody does record it, and, um
And I'll just interject here, that's if a song gets played on radio especially, that
Mhm.
writers get their money from the radio airplay in particular through those
Correct,
organizations.
correct.
Just sorry, just trying to throw in a few clarifications
Yeah.
for people who really don't know that side of things.
Yeah, exactly, and every writer has to be affiliated with one or the
Mhm.
other, but you cannot be affiliated with multiple ones.
Yes.
So the majority of our writers and the majority of Southern gospel writers are BMI writers.
Mhm.
Um, there's a few ASCAP and a few CSAC, but the majority are BMI. So making sure all of that stuff gets together. Then from that point, we start pitching songs to anybody that we know is looking to record an album. Um, Try to find out if they're looking for anything in particular.
Mhm.
Fast songs, slow songs, ballads, songs about a certain theme or a certain storyline. We try to find those things out, and then we pitch them out. It used to be the days we would send out physical CDs with printed out lyric sheets. Now it's
Mhm.
all email or texting songs into whoever is listening. We always try to find out in the group. There's almost always one or two people that are their job is to corral songs for
Mhm.
everybody to listen to. So we try to find out who that is, and then pitch to that certain person. Some artists, not too many in our genre, but some of them rely heavily on their producers, and they want the songs to all go through the producer. Um, so we find out who that is and then pitch it to them. Um, Let them know, if you're interested in this, please let us know. We'll gladly hold the song for you, so that we're not pitching it to multiple artists and then two or three artists come back and say, "Hey, I want this song," or we just recorded this song and somebody else has already recorded it as well. Obviously, you try to keep away from that, but sometimes it happens.
Neat. Can you think of any songs that you're especially fond of having matched the right song with the right group, and it went on, and maybe it was big for the group, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's just an album cut that you're really, I'm really happy this artist, this was the right song for this artist
Hmm.
at that point in their life.
I have 2 that pop into my brain right away.
Okay.
One is a, Chris Binion song. Chris is a great songwriter, he's written a lot of, songs that people, might recognize, but when I first started working with Chris, he sent me this song, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is a great song," and my thing with telling songwriters all the time is it's a timing thing.
Hmm.
Your song may be a great song, but it may not be the right time for it. And
Yeah.
I always say, God has the right group for the right song at the right time. And this is the perfect example of that. He wrote the song God is Faithful
Hmm.
that Karen Peck and New River ended up recording. Um, that song I pitched for a year before it came back around to where Karen was getting ready to record. And so nobody picked it up through that whole time. And so I pitched it to Karen. She goes, "I love this song. I want to record it." So they recorded it, became a great hit for them. Actually got on the Bill Gaither homecoming video from the Georgia Dome, which
Okay.
was one of the biggest selling Gaither videos that's ever been. And so that song became hugely successful for Karen and for the writer. And it was just the right time at the right place because
Hmm.
it had been pitched to a dozen or more groups before Karen, and none of them picked up on it.
Yeah.
Another one would be um, Can I Pray for You?
Hmm.
Or not Can I Pray for You? Sorry, I get these two song titles mixed up all the time.
Oh, I
I
can
Can
pray.
Pray.
I can pray. Yeah.
Yes, that, the, Dove Brothers recorded.
Hmm.
Nathan Marquis is a writer up in Virginia, and he had just sent me a song. I didn't know who he was, and he sent me the song, and I was like, "Well, let me listen to this, see what it is." And it was "I Can Pray," and I was like, "Oh my word, what a song."
Hmm.
and I'm not sure who I'm gonna get it to, but this is gonna be big for somebody, and it just
Yeah.
so happened that the Dev Brothers were coming in to record, and, Chris White told McCrae, he said, "You need to hear this song." And McCrae listened to it, and he was like, "That's a good song, but I'm not sure I hear us doing it."
Mhm.
And Chris
I
said,
can hear that from what they were doing at the time, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it really didn't fit what
Yeah.
their style was at that time,
Yeah.
and Chris said, "You need to cut that." He said, I may even put my foot down. This is gonna be on the album." And
Okay.
sure enough, they cut it. We sent it to radio, and it became a statement song,
Yeah.
for them for a long period there.
Yeah. Very neat. So before I move out of the Crossroads portion of it, we kind of brought the Crossroads history up through about the time of the merger. Are there any other highlights or stories that stand out from some of the groups that have come on, some of the moments in the years since that point? Or could you just, or if there's not one moment, maybe you can just kind of summarize because eventually you moved down south to Asheville, built the studio you're in now. Maybe you can like
Mhm,
summarize a little bit of the history, a little overview of the history up that brings you up to the present day.
mhm. Yeah, we basically outgrew the location that we were in downtown Asheville,
Hmm.
and so started searching, found a building that was available down here on the south side of Asheville, close to the airport, right off of the interstate. It was easy for groups to get buses in, all that kind of good stuff, and so we relocated here in '95,
Okay.
and just things just kept rolling great. A little bit of the history of the company. We were doing really well. A lot of artists had signed, which obviously brings a lot of attention from the Christian music industry as a whole. And there was a gentleman in Oregon that owned a Christian music company called Pamplin Entertainment, and they focus more on contemporary Christian music, and inspirational music, and they heard of us and started finding out what we were, and he wanted a portion of his company to be in the Southern gospel market as well.
Hmm.
And so, Pamplin Entertainment actually bought Crossroads Music,
Hmm.
for a period of time, which was very beneficial for us because it actually put more eyes, in the music world itself, onto us. And we were within the Pamplin, corporation for, uh, quite a few years, and then they just decided they were getting out of the music business completely, and so they
Hmm.
were selling off everything, and so we actually bought ourselves back out of that company and became, Crossroads as a standalone company again at that point.
And that could have gone wrong because I think other divisions just didn't make it at all. So it's kind of a
Yes.
blessing that um, the people were in place and you were able to get that deal together to bring it back because that might have been the biggest choke point where Crossroads might not have made it.
That could have very easily been that way,
Yeah.
because, like you said, all of the contemporary labels that they had, basically ended up just going away.
Yeah.
There was not the machine behind it, to sustain it as to where he had bought us and all of our employees and the studios and everything, and so we could
Hmm.
still self-sustain ourselves, after
Yeah.
we were purchased back out of their corporation.
Neat. And then I guess the other main point, which is actually because I worked there for 6 years, but since
Mhm.
that point, because when I worked there, you were largely involved in publishing and in just the mechanical process of getting the CD layouts done and all the licensing for the CDs and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
You've added one big hat that you've mentioned in passing, um, and that was at least Chris White from the Sunlight side, and I'm not sure if Mickey is so much from the Horizon side, have stepped back in their day-to-day artist relations. You've kind of become the main artist relations person, at least for the Sunlight side of things in the last few years. Like, how did that happen? And was it a challenge? Because Chris had like 30-year relationships with some of these artists. Now, you'd known them too, but he'd been like their main um, contact person for
Yes.
like 30 years sometimes.
Yes.
So was it a challenge
Yes.
for you to move into his shoes, so to speak?
It was, when they decided him and Mickey both had decided they were gonna kind of, work towards the stepping back,
Yeah.
portion and start building for the future of the company. And, of course, they knew they needed someone to do the A&R for all of the gospel side. Of course, Crossroads has 2 sides of the company, even though we're one company. We have
Mhm.
a huge bluegrass side,
Mhm.
of our company, as well as the gospel side, which is Horizon Records and Sunlight Records.
Yeah.
So Chris came to me and he goes, "I'm gonna drop this out there, see if you're interested in it. And if you are, it's gonna be hard work, and it's gonna be a lot of hours, and it's gonna be a lot of training to teach you this. But we're looking at putting you in the position of A&R." Well, of course, I was like, "Sure, yeah. Yeah, I'd love to do it." I already had the relationship with all of the artists,
Mhm.
which was a big plus, um, because I was already working with all of them when they came in to record on
Mhm.
getting their song information, doing their album layouts, getting all of that stuff, pitching
Yeah.
them songs for the albums. So I already had a great relationship with all of the artists. The challenge was gonna be how would they take me as a lead person
Yeah.
for the decisions that were being made. And so I give Chris top props for
Mhm.
this. He went to the artist with me and said, "Okay, here's what we're doing. I'm training him. He's going to get to that spot. But for right now, you ask him questions and then he's going to bring them to me. And
Mhm.
then we're going to get through this stuff to kind of help Greg learn how to do these kind of things in the right way," which was a huge plus. Um,
Mhm.
and I believe that helped the artist to understand what I was going to be doing, how I was going to be doing it. And initially, if they weren't sure of the answer that I was giving them, that they knew that Chris was backing
Mhm.
that decision. And
Yeah.
so, it was quite a challenge.
Mhm.
It's still a challenge from day to
Okay.
day. Artist relations is not, uh, an easy thing, because there's a lot of pressure to that. You're trying to help guide somebody's career,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of pressure, but thankfully, things have, done well, and now I am the first contact between the artist and the company for all the gospel side of the company.
So that's both Horizon and Sunlight, not just the Sunlight
Yes,
artists.
yes, yes, I do both. Mickey is still involved to an extent in day-to-day here,
Mhm.
but he's more of, I guess you'd say, almost like an overseer for the whole company,
Okay.
um, more so than he is day to day with artists. We have A&R people on the bluegrass side and A&R for the gospel side, which basically right now is myself and Roger Talley helps
Mhm.
me with A&R stuff since he does so much of our producing as well.
Cool. So I guess one more question, one more follow-up question to that. Um, there's more to A&R than just helping an artist figure out a strategy for their next recording. That's part of it. Giving them suggestions of, maybe if you take this song or this particular step, kind of like Chris White really nudged the Dove Brothers toward recording I Can Pray. He was convinced it would be a big song for them, and it was.
Mhm.
But there's more to it. Like, what are some of the other things that I'm not asking you to break any confidentialities or anything like that, but in a broad sense, what are some other things that you might help artists with or help talk them through over the course of a year beyond just their next record?
There are multiple different things. Obviously, trying to help steer them on what the next radio single should be.
Okay.
Trying to help them pick those things. What are their thoughts? What's going over well in concerts, versus what might be just more commercial sounding for radio. Sometimes what goes over great in a concert doesn't do well on radio, and vice versa. Sometimes what does well on radio doesn't do well in a concert.
Yeah.
Um, so things like that. There's more in-depth, industry things that I deal with for the A&R side that pertains to the artist dealing with, uh, external, things like
Hmm.
singing news TV, even, if another label or another artist wants them to sing on
Hmm.
their
Guest
album.
performance.
Yeah, there's, things that you have to do legally to make sure all of those things are done correctly.
Hmm.
It's helping to steer them in those type of things. And also even marketing in the world that we live in now, the majority of your marketing is social media driven.
Hmm.
And so trying to help them understand, okay, you've got a new single that's getting ready to drop on streaming platforms. Um, Here's some things we'd like for you to do that would be helpful because the fans obviously want to hear from the artist.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily care about hearing from the label.
Yeah.
And so trying to help the artist understand that and help them get direction on those kind of things and building in the new world of music as it is. Physical CD sales used to be what kept everybody in business.
Hmm.
Well, now physical CD sales are minimal compared to what everybody is doing with the streaming world. Most people listen to music on their smartphones and everything else online. So trying to help the artists understand how that is beneficial to them as well.
Great. All right. So I'd love to shift gears for a couple of minutes and to give a shout out to your church, Trinity Baptist Asheville.
Yeah.
Um, I went to many concerts there in the years I was in North Carolina. Um, how long have you been going there, and how did you become involved with running sound and with the music program?
I've been going there basically since I moved to Asheville back in the early to mid '90s.
Okay.
I moved up here. Of course, I was really good friends with Rory Rigdon,
Yes.
which he's been with the Kingsmen through the years. Was with Gaither for many years, and in his last parts of road type stuff. And so we were actually roommates when I moved up here, and he was with the Kingsmen at the time, and so I was asking him, "I know you're gone on Sundays, but, what's some good churches around?" And so,
Hmm.
of course, he mentioned Trinity, which I knew of Trinity because Trinity's always had a big footprint in the Southern gospel world.
Yes.
And so I started going there back then, and I've basically been there ever since. As a matter of fact, yesterday at church, they were going through anniversaries of the staff, and
Hmm.
I have been doing sound for the church now for 18 years, which it doesn't seem
Neat.
like it's been that long, but it has. So I love my church.
Yeah.
Great church family. It's uh, 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 one of those churches it's large, but it doesn't seem large.
Yeah.
Everybody is very loving and caring there.
Yes. So, from a Southern gospel standpoint, also, you mentioned Rory Rigdon. Um, there are a number of other names people who love Southern gospel will know who have different connections with the church and involvement in the music program.
Mhm.
Can you mention a few of the other people there you work alongside in the Trinity Baptist music program?
Yeah, through the years, of course, Trinity's been the home for many of the Kingsmen members.
Hmm.
Um, Ernie Phillips was a member at Trinity. Squire was a member at Trinity.
Yeah.
Um, Arthur Rice was a member of Trinity from back in his Kingsman days, and
Hmm.
then of course he went with Kingdom Heirs, moved to Tennessee, so he wasn't over here, even though he considered Trinity as his home church. Um, but now Arthur Rice is our music minister.
Yes.
He's been there 4 years, I guess, maybe somewhere around there, 4 to 5,
Hmm.
um, and has really done an amazing job with the music ministry at the church. We've always had mostly traditional music with little touches of, some outside things with the choir and stuff like that. Um, and he's done a great job of keeping that while blending in some of the more, newer music that a lot of the church membership loves, because that's what they hear on, local radio. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
our area is not a big area for Southern gospel radio. There's no big FM Southern gospel channel here, but there are 2 contemporary stations.
Yeah.
Um, and so that a lot of people know some of those songs. And so, Arthur has come in and done a great job. The choir has literally doubled in membership. We're
Mhm.
running 85 or 90 or so almost every Sunday in the choir now. And, so it's been great having Arthur there and, having his Southern gospel background as well as just music, uh, love in general.
Yes. And I also want to shout out, isn't Amber from 11th Hour, isn't she also
Mhm.
involved in the music ministry there too?
Amber and Garrett are members at the church
Mhm.
as well, and when their schedule allows, they're there at the church. There was a period there where their schedule was allowing it 2 or 3 times a month sometimes,
Mhm.
that she was there. Their schedule has picked back up again, and so, they don't always get to be there, but she is involved with the music ministry there as well. Yeah,
Neat.
yeah.
All right. One other thing for Trinity, and that is one of the things I always think of when I think of your church, is it's been the location for the memorial services of a number of the most beloved people in the history of Southern Gospel. Um, what are some of the memorial services you've helped put on, and any special moments from those that really stand out in your memory?
I guess I've helped, at least a small amount in the majority of them since I do sound for
Hmm.
the church. Um, there's been a couple that, musically, singing wise, in them as well as doing sound for them. Um, like you said, there's been quite a few that have been handled there.
Hmm.
Ernie Phillips,
Yeah.
event was just really amazing. God moved in a special way during that service. Of course, it was a very unusual way too, because while on stage during Ernie's homegoing service, Squire had a heart attack.
Oh,
Um,
I heard that. I'd forgotten about that. Yes.
Yes, and so, so it was very unusual, but handled extremely well. Um, and the of Ernie's family, of course, were concerned for Squire, as well, but were not upset in any way, because we had to, right in the middle of the service, kind of pause for a little
Hmm.
while they got EMS in there to deal with Squire, because he literally was on the platform,
Wow.
sitting there when it happened. Um, so that's very memorable
I
from
would
that
guess
one
so.
for sure.
Yeah.
Squire even talked about that afterwards, but, and of course, Squire's, uh the couple things that have been done for Squire there. There was one, of course, while he was still living that Jim
Hmm.
Brady, kind of lined up, to honor Squire, and had a lot of people come in and do the songs of Squire, which was just amazing day. And then, of course, Squire's homegoing honoring service, that we did there too was just amazing to get to see everybody come together and just, worship and honor such great people as those.
Neat. All right. So I think I'll close with this question. Other than how people can keep up with Crossroads. For a group that or a soloist who has the necessary baseline of talent, you have to be able to sing well, sing on pitch, and be able to sing a harmony part usually. So for somebody who has that necessary baseline of talent, what does it take to make it in Southern gospel? It's a
That's a
big
big
question. It's a loaded question. Yeah.
I always tell people, I wish there was a formula for it
Hmm.
that was like, you do this, and this will happen. Unfortunately, it's not always that way, but you started at the right part. You've got to have the baseline of God-given abilities,
Mhm.
to be able to sing, have parts, those kind of things to really get it started. Um, we've had a couple groups that we've brought in that, have had that baseline. One example that I'll use is Endless Highway.
Mhm.
I was actually filling in with the Down East Boys one weekend, and we were out in Missouri, and a big outdoor event. Well, I'm sitting over at a picnic table to the side, and this group comes up to sing, and I'm sitting there talking to songwriter Barbara Huffman.
Mhm.
And so I'm not really paying close attention to what's going on, but I can hear it in the background. And we're having a conversation. I said, Barbara, excuse me, man, I got to hear this group. I don't know who they are, but boy, they're really good.
Mhm.
And she turned and she goes, "Oh, I know them. That's at the time they were known as the Joylanders. It was
Okay.
a family tradition that had been going on for years." And I listened to them and I was like, "Oh my gosh, they're really, really good." And so I
Mhm.
started watching them, and their stage performance was good. They had all the right pieces. They were obviously
Yeah.
talented. Um, and so about I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months later, um, there was a session booked here in one of our studios with an independent artist, and, they came in, and I was like, uh hadn't even been down there to the studio,
Mhm.
and I looked on the calendar, I said, "The Joylanders," and I was like, "Wait a minute, is that the group that I just heard in Missouri?" And
Mhm.
so I went down there, sure enough, it was they were here recording, and they had wanted to come here to do a recording because they had seen the quality of the recordings that we do, for all of our artists, plus the independent artists that record here. So I went down and talked to them for a while, and, it ended up we offered them a label deal,
Mhm.
from this because I had seen them what they could do live,
Yeah.
and then the studio was hearing what they could do recording wise. And
Mhm.
so it was I guess you could say it was the perfect storm. The 2 pieces came
Mhm.
together. And so we offered them a deal, and of course they were with us for 5 or 6 years. Um, and of course, at that point, this was another one of those A&R discussions that,
Mhm.
it's hard to do, sometimes, but we really felt they needed to change the name of the group, uh,
Mhm.
to something that separated them out a little bit more from a lot of your, um normal weekend warriors, as we call them, give them something that sets them apart, which was hard because that name had been there for generations.
Yeah.
Um, but they had actually been having that same discussion.
Hmm.
Is the name holding them back from getting farther in what they were hoping to do? And
Yeah.
so, we worked with them through that period as well. So, um, that's a key one example of a group that had what it takes, but needed that extra side from the working with a label to promote them on to the next spot.
Yeah.
There are some artists out there that have all the tools, um, but some of them never wanna go any farther than what they are, just
Yeah.
working.
They're content doing what they are, and that
They
you don't
are.
need it. And if that's where God puts you, and you're content doing that,
Yes.
go do what God tells you to do.
Yeah,
For sure. For
exactly,
sure.
and be the best at that you can
Yes.
be. Make great recordings. Don't go in and do a recording at a studio because you can do it for $5,000 versus this other place that's gonna cost twice that much to record. It is going to sound the difference to professional people who will
Hmm.
listen to it. But now if all you plan on doing is, just singing with, the local churches, which is awesome. There is a
Hmm.
calling for that.
Yes.
There is a place for that.
Yes.
Uh, but if your goal is to go farther in music ministry, then you're gonna have to put that extra effort in, and you're gonna have to spend that extra amount to get the quality recordings that will actually get played on radio because you're at that point, you're I hate to use the word competing, but you are
A
competing
little
for
bit.
airspace
Yeah.
and airtime with people who are spending that extra money for a recording.
Another detail I throw in there is it helps to sing at least some original material.
It does. It
You
does.
there's
Mm,
nothing wrong with singing in your area and singing your favorite songs by the Perrys
mhm,
and Karen Peck and the Kingsmen and
mhm,
Gold City. If
mhm.
that's what you believe, if that's what God's blessing and that's what you wanna do, go do it, but
Yes.
if you want to play on a national level and get radio airplay, you have to record your own music generally.
Yes, yes, and an example of that, for the people listening and the people that might be interested in this, you may have seen, news or more stuff about a group called the Rogers family,
Mhm.
from here in North Carolina.
Love their
Great
music.
family group, love them to death. First time I ever heard them, they were at our church for our
Oh, really?
jubilee.
Okay.
Did not know who they were, never heard of them before in my life. I'm just in there getting ready to do sound check, and I said, "Okay, what do you need?" They tell me. Um, Start into the sound check, and my mouth just drops open because, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, these people are great.
Yes.
And so, um, followed them for a couple years and then talked to them about, "What do you wanna do? Do you want to do this further than what you're doing it now?" Which they were hoping to do, expand what their ministry is. And so we offered them a position here on one of the labels, which they took. They were excited about that. But we're working on their new album. In fact, they're tracking tomorrow and Wednesday
Oh,
as of
neat.
this recording. Um, and Roger Talley's producing them. And our key to them was the majority of the stuff that you do is covers of old songs and other people's stuff. We need to find you some original music that is still your style and who
Mhm.
you are. We don't wanna change who you
Yeah.
are, but we need original stuff. And so we started getting songs sent to them from, great writers, Adina Bowman and, just, a lot of great Sandy Blythe and, just some great writers getting them some stuff that fits their style.
Yeah.
And they're so excited to actually get to record some songs that will be theirs
Yeah.
instead of, like you said, covering the Perrys or Karen Peck and New River or the Kingsmen or, whatever like that. Um, and so that is a huge part in that next step of getting airplay because it's hard to get airplay if you're just doing covers of old stuff.
Yeah.
Radio wants new stuff the majority of the time, not all the time, but the majority of the time. And so that is a key point in trying to get that to your next recording.
And then the other thought I would throw in there is, from doing a, news website for 8 years, but also working for Crossroads for 6 years. One of the biggest differentiators between the artists who stick around and have a lifelong career and those who try for a couple years and maybe don't have the same longevity, a big part of longevity is just treating people well. Um, Being the kind of person you want to be friends with, to the
Mhm,
fans, to the songwriters, to the radio people, to the media people, to the record company
mhm,
people, to other groups, cheer on
mhm,
other groups. I mean, yeah, there's
mhm.
always a little natural competition, but be other groups' biggest cheerleaders. Be the kind of
Yeah,
person somebody
yeah,
wants to be a friend with. And
yes,
this industry is so relational that goes as far as
yes,
anything does.
yes. Like you said, this industry is really built on relationships,
Hmm.
from, artist to fans,
Hmm.
to artists to songwriters, to artists to record labels, to artists to promoters. Um, if you are wanting to get on some of the larger concerts, you need to be friendly and not pushy with those
Exactly.
promoters. Don't go and say, "Hey, we sing 200 dates a year, and we wanna be on your event." We've got a great fan base following. We think that you should put us on your event. No, you go to that promoter and you say, man, I've been coming to your events for years and I always enjoy your concerts. You always do a great job of putting on what the fans want to hear. If you're ever looking for a group, we'd love to be a part of it and give them, contact information, some way that they can look you up if it's on
Mhm.
YouTube or wherever it happens to be, so the promoters can see what you do, um, and just be friend. And it's that way even with the other artists. Uh, Become friends, become,
Yeah.
people that you can just call up and say, "Hey, how'd your weekend go? I heard you were singing so and so. We weren't able to get there. We were singing too, but hope it went well." And just become friends with these people,
Mhm.
and then they will become cheerleaders for you.
Yes.
That's one thing that I have seen with Endless Highway and with Rogers Family
Mhm.
is the industry people actually really enjoy when I bring up either one of those people. "Oh, I love them. They're so
Mhm.
great. They're such great people." They don't
Yes.
say, you know, "Wow, they do some of the best recordings and have spent some of the most money on albums." They talk about them as people and their way of dealing with them, how friendly they are and stuff like that. I saw the Rogers Family up at Inspiration Park this past
Mhm.
year.
Oh, yes.
They actually volunteered just because they wanted to be around. They weren't singing on the weren't scheduled to be on the program at all,
Oh,
but
wow.
they volunteered to help with ushering and seating and
Oh, wow.
anything like that because they just wanted to be there. They wanted to spend that time and get to listen to all the music.
Yeah.
And so Troy Burns and the Inspirations said, "Well, sure, we'll find something for you to do." Well, then of course they ended up getting him up on stage to sing, even though they weren't actually booked for it. Those kind of things happen, organically as you are that way,
Mhm.
and it's gonna be that way all the way through if you try to go farther in a career, and even if you don't, um, to work even just churches that have a annual 4th Saturday night sing. You wanna be that way with that church because there's gonna be somebody at that church that has a 5th Sunday night sing,
Mhm.
that might like to have you there, and if they talk to church B and church A says, "Well, yeah, they do a great job, but they're a little hard to get along with," or,
Mhm.
anything like that, that's not gonna be good. You want them to be you need to have this group in your church if you're looking for some music. They do a great job. They're plugged in with what the Lord wants them to do. Their music, you can tell they pray about the songs that they record. They have great messages, and they're just good people. That's
Yeah.
what you.
Yeah. Well said. People ask, what is Southern gospel? Well, there's the gospel message in the lyrics. There's usually harmony singing. But beyond that, it's not defined like any other industry. It's defined by the relationships,
It
I feel
really
like.
is. It truly is. It's one of the few entertainment companies or industries that you go to and the fans have as much access to the artist, um, as anything else.
Yeah.
You can easily walk up and talk to, Connie Hopper or Karen Peck or Mark Lowry for whoever Bill Gaither.
Mhm.
You have a access to them at a certain extent, and that's the relationship value of the
Yeah.
Southern gospel industry.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on, for your time, for going a few extra minutes. I really appreciate
Yeah,
your time.
yeah. Hey, I've enjoyed it, Daniel, as
Thank you.
always. Hope that the fans enjoy some of the
Hope so.
background and information, and that it's helpful to them.
Thank you. And how can people keep up with what you and Crossroads are doing?
Best way is actually social media. We do have a website, but it's kind of there.
Hmm.
But with constant stuff, Horizon Sunlight Records um, on Facebook and Instagram is the best way to keep up with us, or Crossroads Studios. We've got a Facebook and social media side for that. So either way, Crossroads, Horizon Sunlight Records, search us out. We're there, and we're hopefully putting out great music that the fans are still enjoying and want to keep following.
Wonderful. And to the listener, thank you for listening to Southern Gospel Journal. You can keep up with the latest episodes on YouTube, Facebook, your favorite podcast platform, or on southerngospeljournal.com. Thanks for listening.